Good evening and welcome to the National Museum of Women in the Arts. I'm Susan Fisher-Sterling. I know lots of you, some of you I don't know, but I wanted to say how much we'd like to welcome you tonight and how glad we are to have you here this evening. I wanted to begin by thanking the Making Their Mark Foundation, Alexa Milroy. Alexa, would you stand, please? Who's the executive director, and also Komal Shah, who's the founder. We are so grateful for their partnership on the Making Their Mark exhibition, and also, obviously, in helping us to bring Andrea Bowers here to be with us this evening. I also am extremely delighted to thank our program sponsors, Denise Littlefield-Sobel, Mary Lou Dore and Alan Davis, Ann Edwards, and Susan and Jim Swartz, who support our Women Arts and Social Change initiatives. And the great news is they are still our founding sponsors and continue to support this series year in and year out. At NMWA, our exhibitions and programs work to illuminate the many ways artists contribute to social change and civic discourse. Tonight's conversation with artist Andrea Bowers will do just that, as we here listen to her and assistant curator Hannah Shambroom delve into her installation, Political Ribbons. Currently on view in the Making Their Mark exhibition. Together, they will discuss Andrea's practice of transforming activism research into artworks that invite participation in reflection, action, and inspired engagement. Tonight's program reflects a long-standing commitment at NMWA to take a look at how artists' practices serve as catalysts for dialogue and collective action. And as I've been thinking about Andrea's work in this evening, I'm reminded, and some of you may actually remember, the Clothesline Project by Monica Mayer, which some years ago transformed our museum into a participatory space, which transformed, where visitors shared personal experiences related to gender-based violence and harassment. The project by this Mexican-born artist demonstrated how art can serve as a platform for community testimony and collective awareness. And another example that came to mind is Lookout by Katerina Cibulka, which Hannah Shambroom also worked on, which was cross-stitched on the museum's exterior during our 2022 renovation, all across the front of the building. And the phrase was, "As long as generations change, but our struggles stay the same, I will be a feminist." And for those of you who may remember the beginnings of the museum, maybe feminism wasn't quite one of the terms that our founder, Mrs. Holliday, had embraced thoroughly. And it was something that the museum was, in some ways, pilloried for in the art press. It's amazing to come 40 years forward, 37 years forward, and see how that has changed, how what was once not a part of the museum has become the mantra or watchword of the museum and the ideals that feminism brings with it. So that work was developed through community input, and it brought our conversation around gender equity directly into the public space. Obviously, Andrea Bowers' work continues in that tradition, and her work reminds us that art can be both aesthetically powerful and socially engaged. Thank you for coming to be a part of the conversation tonight with Andrea and Hannah. Following the event here in the Performance Hall, we invite you to a cocktail reception where we hope you'll continue to discuss the ways that you can move the dialogue forward and obviously connect with one another. Please join me in welcoming Andrea Bowers and Hannah Shambroom to the stage.
Thank you so much, Susan, for that nice introduction. And Andrea, thank you so much for being here and for joining us in DC tonight. And just, I guess, to piggyback a little bit off of Susan's introduction, you were born in Ohio, but you're currently based in California. And for the past 3+ decades, you've been known for your multidisciplinary work that combines visual art with social and political activism. And I know your academic background and training has kind of straddled those two worlds. You pursued an undergraduate degree at Bowling Green University, also in Ohio, and had kind of a more traditional studio training in drawing and printmaking. And then you also pursued a master's degree at the California Institute of Arts in their former feminist art program.
Yeah, well, it wasn't there when I was there. You know,
Oh, okay.
the feminist art program
Yeah.
lasted really almost like, Judy Chicago was only there for like 2 years. And the second year she spent in the basement.
I cannot imagine that.
It has a kind of famous basement.
Yeah, yeah. And so there it sounds like you took kind of more political and socially engaged classes as well as pursuing your studio practice as well. And I'm curious, I guess, for you, at what point your pursuit of the visual arts kind of met your interest in activism? Have those things always been enmeshed for you? Were they ever a little bit more separate in your life?
First of all, thank you for having me. And this museum is one of my favorite places in the world, so I'm really happy to be here. I don't know, it always feels like coming home when I get to come here. It's just, you know,
We
it's
are
lovely.
always happy
I'm
to have
very
you here.
honored.
You're always welcome here.
Okay, so I could say that it's complicated because I think I was like 6 years old when I started a feminist zine that I sold to all the moms in the neighborhood.
How was that received?
They all bought it. They all bought it. I really loved making it. You know, I've always been scrapbooking and stuff like that. So I was making feminist zines. But I think it was always intuitively in my work. I think you spend a lot of time when you're young not really sure what to make and stuff just comes out. And I think for sure CalArts was super important, both conceptualist and feminist teachers. But a little thing that's maybe not so known about me was that right out of grad school, just luck of the draw, I started teaching at UC Irvine. And that was the first multiculturalist art program in the United States, and it was started by Catherine Lord. And it had teachers like Ulysses Jenkins, Daniel Martinez, Young Soon Min, you know, and Catherine. You know, Catherine at the time was with this other, they were a couple, I'm in a block, but I studied kind of with both of them. But that program at Irvine, that multicultural program, even though I was teaching in the program, I think that I was educated in the program. Like Morgan Fisher once said to me, if you want to learn, teach. And I think that teaching in that program was life-changing because it was in a way a militant political program. And I think that I was very aggressively in the critiques. I was shown and taught about my own privileges and to look at the world from a very different way. It was decolonization before we were talking about decolonization. And I think that's actually, I think I learned about ideas and how to make art as a language at CalArts, but it was UC Irvine that politicized me.
Yeah, and is that where you first started engaging more directly with activist groups?
Yeah, I mean, maybe around that time. The first one, it was very, I think it's normal to struggle with whether when you're young, if you think you should keep doing what you're doing, if you should be an artist, you know. And so I think the first 5 years out of grad school, which was around the time I was teaching at Irvine, I taught there for 12 years, I was deciding, I was like sort of separating out and emotionally dealing with if I don't get the opportunity to show, because we weren't even thinking about making money then, and I was living in LA and New York was the center of the art world, you know, will I be happy making work? and can I separate those things? And the answer was yes. And at that same time, my mother got really sick with brain cancer, glioblastoma, stage 4. And so I was driving back and forth visiting her, and believe it or not, in the same town CalArts is in, Valencia, there was a tree sitter who was trying to save a 400-year-old oak tree. And I fell in love with this story and somehow equated that to my mom dying. I didn't want to see that tree. And those activists embraced me in a way that maybe the art world didn't embrace me. And I thought, go where the love is. And I was compassionate about it. And that gave me the courage. And they taught me about like nonviolent civil disobedience. They invited me in. They taught me how to run campaigns, how to participate. And so it was just really a thing of being invited in and going like, okay, this feels so rewarding. Like, I'm going to do this.
Yeah, and you joined them, right, in their tree sitting for a time?
Yeah, well, later on, yeah, because I had documented so many tree sitters. One day I just found myself in a tree.
Yeah.
Then found myself in jail.
It happens, right?
Yeah. But hey, yeah. I'll probably find myself in jail again.
Hopefully not this week.
Yeah.
And I know you're often kind of on the ground with the groups that you work with, joining protests, of course, the tree sitting. I know you spent quite a lot of time at Standing Rock, joining the protesters there against the Dakota Access Pipeline. You've been, involved in different protests in DC too, both, kind of as a participant as well as documenting. How do you take those experiences back into your studio and kind of work through them and apply them to your practice there? And what is your studio space like?
Well, I'm a combination of the other program that was really influential that I taught in for 12 years was at Otis, and it was Suzanne Lacey's public practice program, New Genres Public Practice. So that's art as dialogue. Dialogue is the main medium, and you're really working in communities with communities. And although I was not doing, I think about this ribbon piece as that. So it's complicated. So I have this very socially engaged part of my practice, but it also comes from being from Ohio, where I come from a really tight community. So it just seems natural to work together with people, I think. And I have studied a lot of community organizing, but then I have an addiction to making things. And the more I make a series of something, the more detailed it gets. The more I torture myself with labor. I just can't help myself. I want you to go how did she make that? It's just an obsession I have, So that's a 27-foot tree sitting platform that I made. It's a pimp my ride kind of tree sitting platform. It's a radical feminist pirate ship tree sitting platform, because I once had a activist. I was working with a tree sitting activist building these. Sorry, I shouldn't be talking about these. I just thought I'd tell you. And he said to me, I said to him, "What's your dream? What's your dream tree sitting platform?" And he said, "A pirate ship." And I was like, ugh. I was like, that is why I will never have a career. I cannot think like a boy. I was like, why? Well, of course they would think of a pirate ship. So then I was like, I'm gonna make a feminist pirate ship. Anyway, since we're at the Women's Center, the National Museum of Women in the Arts, I thought I'd tell that. It was just unthinkable what he was telling me, and I thought, okay, I'm gonna do this anyway. And big. It's uncomfortable for me sometimes to make big things. Mm-hmm. There's a whole scale thing.
But you do work at quite a variety of scale, though.
I do. Mm-hmm. But sometimes I feel like I made these beautiful, I was working with Toccata Iron Eyes from Standing Rock, and I hate when video is just projected. I feel like I'm always looking at these standards in art, like the black box, right? You make a projection, you project it. How can you do something else with it? You know, I make documentaries. I interview almost every activist I work with because that's how I learn what they're doing. And so for Toccata's piece, you know, when I had gotten arrested, they cut down over 350 trees, something like that, sycamores and oaks, native oaks, and they left us in the trees. There were 4 activists and 2 trees, and they left us there. And I'd never walked on soil like that before. It's like 4 a.m. and we're dragging, no fancy platforms, we're dragging like doors, you know, that we're gonna hang, and we're fighting with each other because one of the activists has taken a fake name. He won't use his real name, and none of us can remember it. And we're like, and he won't respond unless we use his fake name. Like, it was an absurd I mean, it was totally amazing and absurd. But like walking, it was an area owned by the county, and they decided they were going to cut this forest down. It was untouched native forest, you know, oaks and sycamores in California, because they needed to dredge those concrete rivers we have, and they needed somewhere to put the soot and soil and sand that they dredged. So this area was bowl-shaped. So they decided to cut out a massive forest and then fill it with the soot and then put a housing development on top of it when they were done. So we went in to save this forest, but I've never walked. Like, it was untouched. It was like, I don't know, it was like spongy. I've never walked on land like that before. And then to see the whole thing like clear cut around us. And then we were sitting there, and at one moment, and the older I get, the more kind of spiritual I get, but at that time I wasn't, you know, I was very conceptual, very idea-based, you know? And all of a sudden, like, all the trees are gone, and there's only us and the other 2 who were at a distance off. And all of a sudden, it was like every insect, every animal, everything that flew, everything that climbed, it's like they all climbed in that one last tree with us. And it was kind of devastating. It was devastating to experience. So, yeah, I just never expect that would happen. So, you know, that happened. They managed to cut down an entire forest in a day and a half. And then they left us in jail for 4 days or something like that. It was crazy. But I don't know. I don't know how I got on that. So, I don't know. I just like brought back, sorry. I don't know what your question was. You'll have to ask me again.
Well, I think we were talking a little bit about scale and kind of how you work within your
Yeah,
studio
okay.
versus
So
with activists.
Standing Rock, Toccata Iron Eyes. So I made these massive, so, you know, sometimes art dealers are really important, you know, and there is a gender thing, right? Like, I work with Andrew Krebs. I feel like he's like the only male art dealer I have, and he's a gambler, and I'm a bit of a gambler. But I was making these giant kind of neons, because once I get into a medium, I've got to learn everything about it, and I've got to make the impossible. So I was making these very ornate wall, that's Toccata. She was the youth leader at Standing Rock, one of the youth spokespersons at Standing Rock. Her parents were really intricately involved in running Standing Rock. But I had sized them and had printed them to size and had showed pictures to Andrew Krebs, and he was like, you have to make them bigger. And I work with Light Bright Neon in upstate New York, and when I got there, I felt like throwing up. I was like, they're way too big. It's such a waste of money. Like, you can't afford it. I can't afford it. It felt excessive. I felt, you know, and I don't think I just think that culturally, I think women aren't encouraged to always make big things like that. And the emotional, I don't know, I mean, I was panicked for a couple of, you know, like until the show, for probably months, I was panicked about it. Because it costs so much money, too, you know, and it just, sometimes it feels like you don't deserve to make, like, I don't need to waste all those materials and make something that big and put my name on it. It's uncomfortable, you know? But at times, it makes sense doing it. Like, I'm trying to learn, you know, like, spaces are really different, and I really think it's important to think about the architecture you're working with.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what you just mentioned about kind of diving in so deeply to whatever medium you're working in, I think speaks to one of the kind of themes that's present in the Making Their Mark exhibition, which is the power of form, which explores how aesthetic choices can help explore and probe social and political issues. And you've worked in such a huge variety of mediums and materials and processes. So as you're thinking about a project or an issue, how are you considering what approach to take and kind of what visual output to create that captures what you're thinking about?
I mean, sometimes it's different. Like, there are certain things that I love to do. Like, I love the photorealist drawings that I make, although I haven't been making, I made my first two since, like, I don't know, 10 years recently, and I'm back making them. I was in a museum and saw one of them, and I was like, sometimes you look back, because, like, all we're doing as artists is experimenting in public. You know, you don't know. Sometimes you look back and you go, oh, God, what was I thinking? And then other times you look back and you go, I'm proud of that. You know, and those photorealist drawings, I'm really proud of. And I'm working on a whole show. We'll see, the clock is ticking. You know, I can make one, like, if I work 12 hours a day, 15 hours a day, I can make one in like 2.5 weeks.
Oh, it's a very time-intensive process.
Mainly 3, sometimes it can take 2 months. So, and I have 3 months, so I've got to get going. I need to make 8 of them. We'll see how that goes.
It's very ambitious, but it sounds like a really exciting project.
I have more to make too besides that at the same time. No, I don't know. I think that's the thing. You just have to blindly just go, oh yeah, no problem. I'll stop time.
I wish we could all do that.
It's hard getting older because I used to stay up all night. Now I'm like, oh, I need more sleep.
Definitely understand that.
But anyway, what I wanted to say, too, about what you're saying about materials. So, you know, we have all these theories in, like, relational aesthetics, but I really do believe art is this language, but it's kind of so magical because it's not with words, it's with materials and images and textures, and so we experience it through our bodies. You know, whether we're going like this or whether it's around us, you know, it is a way we communicate to the world and with each other, but it's through all of this kind of magical experimentation. And, you know, it's so incredible that I've spent a lifetime teaching young people, you know, because I've spent years teaching how to speak the language of art and how to make it meaningful and to say something. Yeah, but it's done through all these beautiful things that we invent with.
Yeah, I think that's a really nice segue, I think, into the work that you have on view here at the museum, Political Ribbons, Fondazione Furla, GAM Milan, which is a work that includes hundreds of colorful ribbons, which have been screen printed with phrases kind of around feminism and women's equality, including support the women around you. I think that might be one of the ribbons that one of us is wearing. Dismantle patriarchy, and more bluntly, sexism sucks, which I'm sure is something we can all agree with here.
There's one at Glenstone. I just used, at Glenstone, we looked at a lot of the local community organizations and activist groups, and there's one I would never put, but I think it's the favorite one. I'm not here to be liked. I'm like, oh, maybe that is a good one.
That's a really good one. And yes, I want to mention as well that Andrea currently has an installation up at Glenstone in Potomac. If anyone is local, definitely I encourage you to go look at it. It's a really beautiful show. So
it's a magical space, too.
It is. It really is. But with the political ribbons, you know, you are kind of directly using language. Each ribbon has a phrase on it, and it is a participatory work. So viewers are invited to take a ribbon from it. I hope that everyone here today is able to see the show either on the second floor before the program or down in our great hall. We have a second installation of it. So there's very much this participatory element to it, but from what I understand, the kind of development of the phrases is collaborative as well.
Yeah. So, yeah, in terms of selecting the slogans, these are just about, I love the idea of gift culture. You know, there's theory about it too, right? So when I was teaching social practice or social engagement, you know, and I had studied a little, Felix Gonzalez-Torres was at CalArts when I was there. And I have to say, he's one of my favorite artists. Like, I just love all the giving away, the candy, the posters, and like, how do you do that as an artist? You can't just copy that, you know? But first of all, so the way that I came up with it was, you know, I grew up at CalArts in the early 90s, 90 to 92, in that era, it was postmodernism, and we were looking at a lot of appropriation, thinking that nothing was new, you know, you just borrowed from things and reinvented. You were either honoring or criticizing in the way that you were reworking these past ideas. You know, it came out of architecture first, but then kind of moved into art. We were looking at Las Vegas a lot because it's the ultimate in postmodern architecture. But I was working, I still have it, still ongoing. My whole life I've been collecting. I don't know if I even can decolonize my thinking to understand what an image of an empowered woman looks like. So I want to make representations of women that are empowered. And I'm not totally sure how to do that. So from a very young age, I've been collecting graphic representations, particularly graphic posters, flyers, representations of empowered women. But surprisingly, most of them come from the left, the politically left. They come from socialism, anarchism, democratic movements, humor or union organizing, stuff like that. And so I'm working with those again, but a lot of them, especially before we had pins, you know how we all use pins? They wore ribbons. And a lot of those graphics had women holding beautiful ribbons. Right now I'm drawing a woman, she's gonna be like 8 feet tall, who's holding a ribbon over her head. And it's gonna say, I'm putting a new text on it, it's gonna say democracy is in our hands. But it was through that. So I was asked by the Jewish Museum to be in a show where it was about gifting. And I was like, great, now I get to do this, because gifting is never cheap. Somebody has to pay for you to get the gift, right? And it's expensive and time consuming. And at first I was silk screening all the ribbons myself with Ian, who works for me, because it takes 2 of us. So, you know, I think the first year I did them, I silk screened 60,000 ribbons. And I got like wrist pain, so I was going to the acupuncture. You know, I'm really good at silk screening. And stuff like Occupy Wall Street and Standing Rock had amazing silk screening stations where you could just take your clothes off, they'd silk screen on it, and you'd put it back on. And I was like, how are they doing this? They don't have running water. Oh my God, they don't have heaters. They don't have electricity. They're just doing it, and look at how good they're doing it. And I became obsessed with doing silk screening as good as they do, right? And those activists. Anyway, so once I started doing these ribbons, I'm not good at subjective aesthetic decision making. I don't go like, oh, I think that should be blue. I think that would be really pretty if that were pink. Like, everything is conceptual. What are the movement's colors? What's the local, like, what are the activists making work about? Are there colors associated with that? So every time I kind of like, and if I have to make subjective decisions, I want it to be a group decision. So I'm always like, okay, what do we think? You know, like, what colors are you interested in? Why are you interested? Like, it's like at Glenstone, their colors are based on, they have a huge water element in the middle of the building, and I'm not there enough to watch it change over the seasons. So someone who worked there, we worked together on coming up with palettes of the seasonal change, right? And then I always love to try to cause some institutional collaborations with local political or community-based organizations. So we kind of reach out to those organizations, see what campaigns they're working on, see if we can get slogans from it. Right now, I'm working on slogans with we're gonna do a ribbon installation in Italy because they're now building nuclear energy with all that's going on in the world. So now we're doing a series of anti-nuclear, which again, I think I did when I was like 27 years old, was working with this idea from the 80s, right? Anti-nuclear messaging because of the war in Iraq, because of, the war with Russia. All of this is leading to nuclear power again. So anyway, so it's a really beautiful, fun collaboration, and then I get to know the folks in the organization, and we just keep narrowing down. You start with a big list. It's like editing film. Just keep narrowing it down until you get a list you're happy with.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you bring up the project in Italy because the political ribbons that are here, I think, were originally installed in Italy, and you, I imagine, worked with the Fondazione Furla and GAM Milan on that. And so I guess...
And some of them were in Italian.
Yes, yeah, I think we still have some of the Italian
yeah,
ones, actually. It's very fun.
So because you literally have that piece.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
So Kamal actually owns this, project. I don't really sell this. It's an ongoing thing, but Kamal has a set. And I'm always like, sometimes like, hey, can we move the slogans around? Like, let's do some new slogans. I think it's time. Because I think they're so timely. I try, working with language. I'm always trying, I've always loved, like text, art, text and art. But I'm always trying to think about, will this still function, in 20 years, less so with the ribbons, but still I think about how these things might function over time. There's a long picture in the way that I think about the documentation of activists that I do.
Yeah, and I was curious about that with the ribbons because, of course now they're kind of removed from the original context. They're in a private collection that has been behind this, incredible exhibition that has been traveling now kind of all across the country to, New York, Berkeley, St. Louis, now here.
Yeah, it's so amazing.
Do you feel like the kind of reception to the work differs in each place? It sounds like you've adapted it a little bit in terms of some of the phrases.
Yeah, I think the way I was thinking about it is one of my life goals is to prove that art and activism are interlinked and can't be separated. Mm-hmm. So like there's some amazing women in the audience tonight who have their ribbons on, and the idea is that I see them on social media. People send me pictures. One day I was watching MS Now and realized that the person talking had a whole wall of ribbons behind them. Wow. So it's believing in that people take them back out in the world and use them, whether they hang them in their homes, but a lot of people take them to marches, and I give them away at marches as well. I don't disseminate them just at galleries and museums. I disseminate them at marches. And so I really do think they can function in both ways, but they always serve to encourage people to use their voices to speak out. And so when you pick a ribbon, you're picking something you believe in general. It's like, it's very personal, in what you're gonna pick.
Yeah, it feels very personal, and it's funny kind of observing people engaging with the work and kind of looking through and picking through the whatever phrase is speaking to them most, whether it's generally or kind of in that day or in that moment. I know one of my favorites is the ribbon that says "Women in the Earth have to tolerate a lot."
I know, that's the one
I think
I
that's
have
the one
on.
you're wearing, yeah. But I think that that one especially speaks to something which is really at the heart of much of your work, which is ecofeminism, kind of this, equal look at feminism and environmentalism and how the two have interacted with each other. Has that been something that has been a focus for you for, kind of your whole career? Is that something that you've engaged with more recently?
It's maybe the last 8 or 10 years. It's kind of something I was avoiding because I sort of felt like, my generation, Suzanne Lacey and I did she's a second wave feminist. She and I did some projects together. And I thought that those second wave feminists, they're very smart, but I thought all of their work was really theory based. And then I realized collaborating with her that it's very humor based and that actually my generation has no humor. Like it was theoried out of us, right? Like, oh, you have to be an intellectual. You have to read like Deleuze and Guattari. Like you have to read all this I was trying to read these feminist texts where I was like, no way. I finally threw it up and I was like, I got to go back to where people speak in some plain English. Like, I can't do it. Like, grateful for all of it. I don't even like Freud or psychoanalysis. Anyway. But, yeah, so I don't know. I did it again. I got onto the Freud psychoanalysis thing. But you asked me about the ecofeminist. So I was afraid because of the theory that was forced upon me as young. I was afraid of ecofeminism because I felt like during the Reagan administration there was you had post-feminism, which was very anti-feminism actually, and and you had like Rush Limbaugh calling us feminazis. Like it was this really moment of everything that had moved forward was being pushed back. And so I wasn't willing to deal with the spirituality associated with ecofeminism. And it wasn't until really just before COVID, well, it was kind of COVID, where I was like I went to Connie Butler because we were doing a retrospective at the Hammer, and I said, I want you to write about witchcraft and feminism in my book. She's like, no way. But, ecofeminism had this kind of like woo-woo attitude, like they're not serious, but they were some of the most serious activists. Their lives were threatened. There was attempted murders upon them. They threatened governments in a way that nobody else threatened governments. And it was an international movement. And some of my biggest heroes or models, of what I look towards. And so, but it was something I avoided because I thought that it undermined feminism in some way. And so I think I'm always trying to look at my prejudices and preferences and confront them. And I just have a lifetime of doing that. Like whatever I'm not willing to touch, I need to go there. And then when you start looking at these histories, it's like so moving and meaningful. But it was Suzanne Lacey who said to me, if you're gonna look at ecofeminism, you should check out Dina Metzger. She was my teacher during the first feminist art program when Judy Chicago was there. She was the head of the critical studies department. And I called Dina and we've been collaborating ever since. She's in her early 90s. I'm trying to make a film, a documentary of ecofeminists right now. It's hard, times are hard, it's really expensive to make things, but that's my current dream because Susan Griffin just passed away, and I've been using, they are so much better at language, so I've been using their language, and if something sells, I try to give them you know, like a couple $1,000 every time I use a line of poetry when something sells, you know, and just put because their words are so beautiful, and I don't have that same language ability. I don't have that same poetic ability. And it's so heavy hitting. Well, Susan just died, and I'm so mad that I didn't sit, you know, here I was working with her and not sit down and record her. And I just think that group of women, there's so many of them that I'd love to interview. But I've been working most closely with Dina Metzger. And so, Dina, if you're out there, I'm ready to interview you. I haven't even told her yet. But she just did an interview with Hans Ulrich Obrist. You know, I was talking about her, and Hans interviewed her. So she just texted me or wrote me and said it was like so amazing. And so I'm happy that her practice is being put in a historical dialogue now within the art world, because she's so important.
Yeah. And then I guess just to sort of round our conversation out before we start taking questions, I wanted to ask, you know, you've kind of talked a lot about how you work with activists, how you know, sort of hope your art connects with and sort of serves activist movements. I think oftentimes success in activist and advocacy spaces might look very different than what we traditionally think of as success within the arts. You mentioned, for example, that you know, typically don't sell the political ribbons works. That could be, you know, something that people kind of look to, or, you know, exhibition opportunities. So where your work sort of falls within these spaces, what does success feel like to you? Is it exhibiting, selling? Is it serving these sort of bigger causes, you know, pushing things along?
As an artist, it's the ability to have opportunities to keep making things. Like, that's the number one thing, to learn and make things and be in dialogue with the artists I admire. And I mean, it's all about joy and love, really, right? Like, you know, developing these relationships with folks. So the one question I try to ask, I don't work with any activists that don't want to work with me, because that's ridiculous. Like, if my practice doesn't give you anything, if I can't be in service of someone in some way, then there's no reason for us to work together. So, I mean, it's really their lifelong friendships, their relationships. You know, times have been tough recently because everyone's really struggling. So it's, and there's so many big issues and big marches that, I don't know, there's like a lack of fluidity, because there's so many issues to deal with. But it's just, I mean, it's just about joy, and I think one of my most important jobs is connecting people. You know, as long as I can keep making things and connecting people, that's success for me.
Yeah. Well, that sounds like the perfect kind of very optimistic note to close our conversation. And I think we can take questions from folks if they have any.
I'm sorry I was all over. Go ahead. Do we do microphone? Oh. Everybody's really together.
I'm so glad that you talked about Not Here to Be Liked, because that was the ribbon I picked from Glenstone.
Wait, say that again.
I picked the ribbon, Not Here to Be Liked.
That
That was my favorite. What I really was struck by is your army of letters, how hard-hitting it is, and the concept of gifting, the concept of humor. But what I appreciated there was that you had all these beautiful patterns that broke up the letters.
Right, they're like gift wrapping paper and decorative paper. And one of the activists, so that piece, the Army of Three, it's 3 women activists prior to the passage of Roe versus Wade in the Oakland area. Pat McGinnis, Rowena Gerner, and Lana Phelan. Rowena was no longer alive by the time I met them, and this was many, many, many years ago. That's one of the earliest pieces I made. And they basically, it was illegal, but they were sending lists of doctors who would give safe abortions outside of the United States, mainly in Mexico and Japan, but they would travel to Mexico to meet these doctors to make sure that they were giving safe abortions. But people, so they were advertising in like, you know, local leftist newspapers or like Playboy, like Hustler, because the men would read it and tell their wives, you might be able to get a list of doctors, right? Or boyfriends. They were advertising wherever they could, but they were so, it was so needed because there was no internet or social media or anything, right? Like it was all through letters. People were writing them letters and they would tell their personal stories of why they needed to have an abortion. And so I had met Pat. I had gone up to San Francisco and I had met Pat. And I noticed she had these stacks of these letters in plastic bags, like all the way to her ceiling. There were thousands of them. And I had $75. And I said, will you Xerox as many as you can and send them to me? And she was a massive letter writer. So she sent me $75 worth of Xerox photocopies of those letters. And she personally crossed out every name. And then later she gave me documents and everything else. And I had interviewed Pat and Rowena as well on film. But I was thinking about conceptual art because I was trained by conceptual art. And one of the criticisms was that it was like so boring and ugly and unattractive and cold and unemotional, you know, like they just like, it was like materials were minimized, right? And ideas were prioritized. And I thought, oh God, you know, I've got to get people to look at these. And I started, and Pat had said to me, you know, the women's movement really suffered when all those sort of like corporate women came in, took over, and they used all those happy colors and happy statements with all those like cute flower images and stuff. And I thought, oh, form is not neutral. So I thought, I was like, I'm going to talk about like modernism. I felt oppressed at the time by abstraction. As if that was the leaning, I think it still is the most powerful movement in art, right? And I was like, I'm gonna make abstraction political, right? I'm going to show that it is not neutral. And I started working with flowers and abstract patterns, trying to make it really girly. And I was also thought about, you and I both have patterns on us, right? And like as camouflage, right? We look happy. We look, you know, women and flowers sitting next to them. You know, meanwhile, we're dealing with all this intense material. And so I wanted to put that contrast together so that the flowers might draw you in and go like, oh, and then you read the letters and you go, oh, you know, like this emotional tension that would draw you in and then like be gut-wrenching in a way. So, yeah, I was just thinking, yeah, and I was trying to undermine that tradition of flattening out women with flowers. You know, like bless Matisse, but like women were, you know, erased in flower patterns, you know, and I wanted the flowers and the pretty colors to emphasize the material rather than silence it.
And also, the work you did on cardboard was very compelling because how fragile cardboard is, how non-archival. As an artist, that was the thing that bothered me the most. Like, this is going to go away.
Well, you know, they're so soaked in matte gel medium, and acrylic polymer. Like, I'm like one of these people, like I have people help me make those, obviously, because some of them are really big. Another way you can make something big is make it in a material that you're not afraid of, like cardboard, right? But it came from the Occupy movement because, like, I was so jealous. I tried to visit as many Occupy encampments as possible, but they had all those cardboard slogans. Like, my dream is like tons of slogans and handmade drawn things. And I was so jealous. I was like, I have to quit being an artist. This is the most beautiful. I'm so jealous. This is so amazing. And I thought, how can I do this but in my way? And that's when I was like, I have this collection of these massive, like these women. I'm going to make, the whole thing was scale. All these representations of what I thought were empowered women, take them and make them huge, because most of them were small flyers. And I thought, make them huge. I'll do it with the cardboard from the Occupy, like, glue it all together. But yeah, and so now I have people help me. We're doing 7 of them right now at the studio. Some small, some large, some medium. But I'm like constantly taking X-Acto knives. I mean, they look like floral arrangements because I dig them all out. I fill them. We buy 5-gallon buckets of matte gel medium. And I just keep adding more and more and more. And then the tops look all like cardboard and smooth, but they're covered in acrylic matte medium. And then on the backs, I put canvas. Like, I just soak them so they'll last as long as they can. But they are cardboard, Look at Rauschenberg's cardboards. They're still around and they're beautiful. I always look to the art historians. Right, the Rauschenberg cardboards. But, yeah, they're giant protest signs, so it's okay. And they're recycling, it's like we have to, I think every artist should try to take some action in their exhibitions towards sustainability. And so it can be with materials. At Glenstone, I didn't take any walls down. I left the same walls up as the artist before me. It's like, what can you do to make a show more sustainable? So, yeah, cardboard. It comes in the mail, and then I glue it together. They're very popular at Glenstone. People love the cardboards? They love them. Yeah. Thank you. I love making them. Now what I really love, I'm all excited about them again because now we have these drawing, I taught myself digital drawing on an iPad. So just this constantly bringing in images to make the old stuff look newer, to put different faces, right? To put different things on their bodies, to use, right now I'm using a suffragette image. But, I'm changing the slogans, I'm changing the faces, I'm changing the diversity of the faces, and that little iPad, I sat all day on the plane yesterday, and it's just giving me opportunities to do more, not just copy, not just change colors, but literally create. So there's a reference to the past, and there's something new and contemporary within these images now.
Time for one more question.
Sorry, that one question I answered 20 minutes. Yeah.
It's so fun to hear you talk, so it's fine. But so something, I am also a guide at Glenstone, and something that I like to kind of ask people about is how caring goes into your artwork. And I'm so happy to hear you talk about Felix Gonzalez Torres, because I'm like, how many artists give you something through their artwork, but also how many people it takes to get you to that one little gift. And I can't believe that you did that many by yourself. That's insane. And
I still silk screen them.
Yeah, that's so cool. That's so cool. But this moment of caring, I think that it comes through in your artwork so beautifully. This I didn't know that, but it did cross my mind of, wow, that came overseas from Italy. Somebody had to order them.
I mean, the reason I make them in Italy now, because Glenstone is giving away so many, it's so incredible. I feel guilty, in a way, how many we're having to make. But my studio is probably not big enough to make that many, but also the Italian colors are more prettier. Their ribbons, they do it better, let's face it. They've been making ribbons for fashion for hundreds of years, and they're so exquisite, and their silk screening is so beautiful. But they're actually less expensive than we can do it in the studio, just because, it takes 2 or 3 of us. They have like equipment that can cut the ribbons faster, silk screen faster, to do it by hand, so it saves the institution. But if I'm doing small batches, we whip it out in the studio. We can do like 300, 400, 500 a day.
I just think that it's so, I guess I don't really have a question. I'm just really think that you're.
But okay, so
you're
also,
carrying through
one
your
of the
artwork.
things I love is the swings. There's swings that are tree-sitting platform chairs that are like literally thrift store chairs. Nothing costs, they start with a chair that's free or costs no more than $30, right? And then we put, tree-sitting slogans on it, environmental slogans on it. But they're really fun because I feel like so many art fairs, so many art events, so many institutions need comfortable seating, especially if you're going to make a long video. You should have comfortable seating, and that's a legitimate issue. And also, I love that Glenstone has the piano. It has like boxes of revolutionary music, and it's a piano from a local organization that works with people who need food risk, or who need food, or homeless, they're unhoused.
I wish I could help you out. I don't remember the exact.
So that's where it's from. So we got them a new piano, and I think there was a donation made to them, and we used their piano, but people can come in and play revolutionary piano music all day long. And it's so nice to just suddenly be in this space and hear this piano music. And I love I've always thought of art spaces as community places, like community centers, right? And so it should be more activated. And so I try to do that in every show in some way.
It's such a gift. It's such a thoughtful gift.
Thanks. Okay, are we done? Sorry, okay.
Well, thank Hannah and Andrea for that talk.
Thank you so much.
As Susan mentioned, we are having a cocktail reception on the mezzanine floor where you'll be able to ask more questions. So we invite you all down to the second floor, to the mezzanine, and then also you'll be able to grab a ribbon in the Great Hall. So we'll see you down there. Thank you.